Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new little series of videos that we're doing. And welcome back to Ken. Having completed our little trip through the Healing Light Tarot, we thought that we would take you on a journey through our, well, what at the time of recording is our new and forthcoming deck, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Oracle of the Hekatean Path. So, yeah, we are going to tell you a little bit about our project, and also we are going to give you a guided tour through the cards. So bear with us, and we kind of hope you enjoy going through the cards with us as much as we enjoyed creating them, because we did have a bit of fun, really, didn't we? It was, yeah. I'm kind of laughing because, you know, I'm as Scrooge and bar humbug about collaborative projects as most people are about Christmas, aren't I? And this kind of proved me wrong.
Yes, I think I'm that rare jewel where I wasn't deterred by your requests and things. I just gave you everything you asked for.
Well, I kind of was a bit mean, wasn't I? But actually, I'll tell you what. Tell everyone the story about how this started first, and then we'll get on to my phone grilling.
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea I'd had for a Hekatean Oracle deck had been it's sort of rattling around in my head for a good few years, and I'd kind of started with a very basic idea of, you know, a selection of symbolic images on cards to use as, you know, a very rudimentary form of divination in connection with Hekatean practice. And then it was a few years later I kind of started to develop the idea of a bit further, and I thought maybe I would do it as an appendix to a book I wanted to write about, you know, Hekatean practice. And I thought that way the people could, you know, take the basis of it and then create their own devotional tool, you know, in whatever medium they felt comfortable with, and so that the devotional connection would be more personal, you know.
I didn't realise. So when you started this, it was actually more, the original concept was more book, but then encouraging people to create their own either deck or divination tools as they saw fit.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the book itself is still to be finished, but it's a basic introduction to obviously Hecate as a goddess, but also working with her, you know, spiritually and rituals and things like that, that things that I developed and learned over the years of my devotion was kind of to try and lay foundational pathways for other people. And I often, you know, the reason that we kind of settled on this notion of the Oracle of the Hekatean Path was I, you know, she's the goddess of crossroads. She's the goddess of, you know, journeys and transitions. But I found that, you know, there's a lot of conjecture between different people. They like to argue over which version is better and who's right and who's wrong. You know, there's, you know, orthodoxy versus orthopraxy, all that kind of stuff. And yet the thing is that she's completely removed from all of that, and she exists at this cosmic crossroad nexus. And it's a bit, you know, to paraphrase the all roads lead to Rome thing, they all, you know, if you're walking a Hekatean path, all roads lead to Hecate, regardless of whether you're walking them parallel to other people or crossing under and over. You know, there's more that we have in common than what we do have in, you know, in the differences. And I always maintain that, you know, I'm walking the path to Hecate, and I can give you guidance and direction on how to walk your path, but your path is not necessarily my path, and I'm not going to tell you that it's right or wrong one way or another. So the idea of doing it as an appendix to the book was in that vein was, you know, this is an idea, make it your own, you know, put your time and energy and effort into it to deepen your connection with the goddess. And I kind of had almost resolved myself to that would be how it would be. And then it just so happened that I stumbled across a curious little deck called the Healing Light Tarot, but by yours truly, or yours truly. And yeah, there was just something about it as I started to use the deck and that I could kind of see some of the ideas that I had like materializing in this artistic style that because your artistic style is quite unique to you. Although some people would say, oh yeah, but it's it's digital art and stuff like that, and some people can say it looks, they don't see the differences, and I don't know, I really saw the differences, and I I liked your your the layers and the light and shadow and the silhouettes and things like that, and there was just something about it that really made me sort of go, yeah, do you know what, this would be a really good style for an oracle deck. And yeah, I just
really weird. There was quite a few, what's the word, not coincidences, but it was kind of as if we were kind of meant to connect up, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, what you cracked me up. I haven't realized you thought I was in the States, didn't you?
I did. Yes. I don't know what, I think I've always had this preconceived notion that anybody that's had anything published somehow must always live in the States.
I'm just a common Scouse tart, Well,
I mean, it's not even just that, is it? As we got to know each other more, things like your parents know my old science teacher and really weird things like that.
There was this weird, absolutely weird set of like synchronicities, wasn't there? Because I mean, the first I knew about you was, it turned out we had a mutual mate, didn't we?
Yes.
And of course he turned up and he says, I've got this mate who's got an idea for a deck. And I'm thinking, oh God, no, please, not again. And I know that sounds awful, but I'm kind of really collaboration resistant, because I've had a couple of failed collaborative projects. And I mean, this is no disrespect to anyone I've worked with, but a lot of people come into the process of deck creation from quite a naive point of view and do not realize what it takes, not just from the artist's point of view. I think people kind of understand the amount of work and commitment that you put in as the artist. So but I mean, in several instances where I've had sort of abortive deck creation projects, I kind of didn't vet the author of the deck closely enough, and they didn't realize how much they had to put in to actually get me to be able to realize their vision. So I'd sort of come from a bit of a battered and bruised perspective at this stage, because I'd just come out of 2 failed ones over the last couple of years, both of which I've got to put my hand up and say, well, I was too naive when I went in. I mean, one of the reasons a lot of people will know me as the artist, not just of the Healing Light Tarot, but also as the Quantum Tarot. And one of the reasons I'm so proud of the Quantum Tarot is that, both Kay Stopforth and I would openly admit that working together was like pulling teeth. We really did not gel. I've got a huge level of respect and affection for Kay. I love her to bits, but we were bad for each other in the workplace, and it was like we actually we coined the term quantum git for each other, because we kind of somehow didn't get each other, and this never happened. And one of the reasons we're so proud of that deck is that we actually created something really powerful despite the differences, and it's still one of my proudest achievements for that. But of course, digressing a bit, rolling back to your story, our mutual mate phones me up and says, I've got this mate who wants to create a deck and he's interested in you doing it for him. And I'm thinking, oh, please, no, not again. So, of course, by this stage, having had 2 abortive, project, okay, mine and Kay's succeeded brilliantly, but then I had 2 that didn't. And of course, I'd learned a lot of lessons about what I should have given to the sort of deck authors, as well as what they should have given to me. So, of course, I'm thinking, right, I'm going to reel off my shopping list of what I need. So, of course, I'd said to him, didn't I? I said, just give him my number and we'll chat. And because you phoned me up. And, of course, anyone watching this, Ken phones me up and I let him give me the spiel of the deck. And then I thought, right, give him the shopping list. So it was like, right, I want this, 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 this. And I think I said, I want like sort of exhaustive list of cards, complete detailed synopses of everything that you want on the cards. I mean, I wanted the microwave oven. I wanted the cuddly toy. I wanted the new car. I mean, I kind of basically just put huge lists of demands. And then I'm kind of smugly and relievedly thinking, right, that's it. I've done my duty. I'm not going to hear anything back from them again. And then there's a pause and he says, oh, yeah, that's all right. I'll just send all that over to you when we come off the phone.
Yeah. And then there was just this pregnant pause in the conversation where you weren't quite sure what to say.
I thought, no, surely he's not serious. And then, of course, you did, didn't you? And actually, that I mean, there was two things happened. Because, I mean, I came off the phone. You emailed me all the stuff over, and I read through, and I thought, oh, God, this guy has done his homework and knows his stuff. So at that point, I knew that you really understood what creating a deck was about. But then also, I thought, I was reading through and I'm thinking, this takes me into completely virgin territory. And I've got to be honest, I was just completely intrigued. Because, I mean, my background, I mean, some people watching this will know, others won't. My background is in academic Christian theology. I have a theology degree, but also, you know, faith-based issues are very delicate for me because, I mean, apart from having a degree in theology, which kind of saved my life, you know, I also had to extricate myself from, you know, quite coercive control in religion, you know, in my younger life. And so, but all of a sudden I thought, oh, wow, I was into goddess territory, which is somewhere I'd never really ventured before. And actually what you sent me was just so intriguing, not just from an artistic perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective and a sort of unknown territory perspective for me. That did I phone back within about half an hour? I can't remember, or did I email you?
It was fairly quick, sort of on the take up. I think once you'd picked your jaw up off the floor, I think it was pretty quick.
I kind of feel a bit of a fraud now because it's like I went from kind of giving you this shopping list of massive demands to try and put you off, and then as soon as I'd read your spiel, it's like sort of, you know, let me be your artist at any cost. Thank you. You know, which
it was pretty quick from that moment on, though, wasn't it? Because I think within the next breath, by the end of the week, you'd already done at least 3 sample images.
Because do you remember we chatted and you'd said to me, right, I think we started with the Strophalos, didn't we? The
wheel, yeah.
And I can remember just sitting on the computer and thinking, oh, wow. Because it wasn't just, I mean, it's one thing when you're creating and you know, you've got the satisfaction of watching the ideas take shape, but there was just something so beautiful and mystical and magical about that card. And I kind of knew I was starting, you know, not just an artistic project, but a real learning process, and actually something that was going to sort of open my horizons out. So, yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, we've done 3 cards within a couple of days, haven't we?
Yeah.
And actually found that we could work together really effectively, because I didn't know what to expect. I thought, you know, I could send this image back to you and you could, you know, you would end up looking and saying, well, that's not really what I visualized, or that doesn't capture it. But we kind of never really, did we have any cards like that? I don't think we did. We had a couple of problems. Well, we had one problematic one, didn't we?
one particular problem, but yeah, generally speaking, I mean, when you sent that Hecate wheel card initially, you know, on one level, it's quite a simple execution, and yet it was definitely interpreted as that how I'd seen it, and it had everything that I knew that you could provide in that one image. And then I think that one of the other cards as well, I think there was a couple of minor tweaks that I sort of asked for in it straight away, and you went off and did it, and then when it came back I was like, yeah, that's it, that's fine. And so it just seemed to be very painless, almost, that you seemed to get what I was getting at, and I knew what you were capable of. It was very
kind of ironic that it's actually been from a creative point of view, it's actually been my most painless project. And I never thought I would hear myself say that my most painless project was a collaborative one. You know, because I mean, that's not criticizing any of my collaborators, but actually collaborating on something of this scale is a really complex, it's a really complex thing. There's got to be a kind of really sort of almost intuitive understanding of where the other party's coming from. And I think to my surprise, we kind of didn't have to work on that, did we? We kind of just, but
no, I think it was just pretty almost, I don't know, without sounding trite in saying, we were reading each other's minds or we were on the same wavelength, but there was a lot of unspokenness when it came to the creative process, especially when on the occasions when I came up to stay for the intensives where we worked, over a couple of days to get quite a lot of things out. There were, we would start with deciding on which card we were going to create that at that moment, and I would give you the basic idea, and then I kind of would sit back and just you would do your bit and you'd go so far, and then I would either say, yeah, can we do maybe this, or you would say maybe if we do that, but there was no like real detail in what we were in our communication. It was just a lot of it was a lot of friendly unconscious assumption that just worked.
I hadn't thought about that actually, but you're right, because we didn't really. I kind of just put it down to the fact that you'd kind of really done your homework, and actually you had, because I mean your actual descriptions of the concepts for each card were actually quite detailed before we started out. So I mean, it was a godsend for me because I didn't have to sort of spend time picking your brains to find out what you wanted. You kind of knew, but then I hadn't realised actually that there was also a lot of unconscious communication going on. But something you touched on before, I think probably has a lot to do with it, in that we discovered as we got to know each other that we actually had a lot more in common than we realised, didn't we? We'd sort of grown up in the same town without knowing. You'd gone to my local school, albeit, later than I would have done, with the age gap. And also it turned out, as you said, one of your teachers is actually a close friend of mine who had also taught me years before. And I think one of the things, we kind of got each other culturally right from the start without realizing, because there was so much shared experience. And I think that in a way kind of helps the thought process and the kind of the fusion of thought processes, doesn't it? Because I kind of just got what made you tick,
Yeah. And I think, and even on the occasions where I struggled to put into words what I was after, I knew that deep down you knew what I was trying to get at, and generally through a little bit of clicking and what does this filter do and what does that effect do, and then all of a sudden we'd just be able to sit back and go, right, okay, yeah, that's done.
That's it.
It was it was just surreal how, like you say, how painless it was.
But it's fun. I think a lot of it does go back down to actually the fact that you'd put a lot of time and effort into what you wanted in the cards, and it had quite a gestation process before I came anywhere near it. But also to give you an idea of what could have happened, and one of the reasons why I'm kind of so collaboration resistant, because I mean I've found myself in a number of times in a position where you're on the computer and it's like you put a pile of work in and then it goes back to the author and it's like, I don't like that. And it's like, well, what do you want? It's like, oh, I'm not sure. There's a kind of very clear idea of what you don't want, but not a very clear idea of what you do want. Whereas with you, it's like, because I kind of always knew that even if you weren't sure of the details, it was all buried in there. So if it wasn't quite working on screen, I mean, we'd just go and have a cup of coffee, wouldn't we? And I'd know that just let it sit for about 10, 15 minutes, let it percolate. And then I knew that as soon as we got back on the computer, or, if we were working remotely, I could sort of, if there was something you weren't happy about with the draft, I could then just say, right, let's sit on it for the afternoon and then we'll chat again this evening, by which stage it kind of just bubbled up to the surface with you and then you come up with the solution.
Yeah.
It's a joy. As an artist, I mean, that is so easy. When you've got an author that knows exactly what they want. And also, just like with you kind of understood the creative process, that if it wasn't quite working, you just go and leave it on low boil, until it was done, and then we could come back to it. And we had a couple of cards that we sort of weren't quite working, and then we just left them until, say, 5, 6, 7 cards down the line, didn't we? And then came back to them and did a little bit of tweaking.
I don't think there was any really that we gave up on. It was just a case of, we know we're on the right track, but we've just not quite hit the nail on the head. And like you say, we'd rather than expend energy on trying to force the birthing process, we would go, okay, yeah, we'll knock that one on the head for now, and then we'll come back to it. And like you say, it might have been through the creative process of another card that we suddenly think, oh, I wonder if that effect will work on that card, and then because I mean, for you, as you've mentioned before, you were learning as you were creating, because you were still learning new things, and you found yourself being pushed into new territory. So yeah, it's still, it's even to think back at the whole thing, it's a very surreal process that we seem to just sort of blessed to get through without having a fallout.
The funny thing is, because I mean, we didn't, did we? I mean, poor Kay, I mean, she got the worst of me. I mean, I think the Oracle of the Hekatean Path, I think, benefited more from the Quantum Tarot than it did from any of my other projects, because I think probably Kay and I were quite blissfully naive. It was my first big collaborative project. And I think Kay's as well, because Kay is she's got an incredible talent and vision. And I mean, she'd already published the Universe cards with HarperCollins when she approached me about the Quantum Tarot. So, I mean, full kudos to Kay and full respect. I mean, Kay was a really experienced author, but I think both of us were in completely virgin territory with that kind of collaboration. But I mean, we ended up with 8 magicians before we got to the one that we wanted, and it kind of felt like the cursed card. The irony is, when we got the version that actually is in print now, we both looked at the screen and immediately we didn't have to say anything. We just knew that was it. But I think a lot of that was because I think probably if I was working with Kay now, if we were doing that project, I think it would probably be closer to how we worked, because there was no question of Kay's professionalism, but I think we were both inexperienced with regards to the dynamics of a collaboration, But I think I carried a lot of that into our project, and there was a lot of lessons learned. But because you came in with a similar level of professionalism to Kay, I could work with that, and also I'd learned those lessons by that stage. And so it was. But there was a kind of magic about that experience and watching it take shape. There was also a lot of cake consumed during the course of that.
Cake, coffee, and wine.
Yes, rather a lot of wine. But we were good because the wine didn't get consumed until after we.
Yes, that was at the close. At the close of play, at the end, we had a congratulatory glass of wine.
Yeah.
So the whole process is, like you say, was a bit almost magical, just the way it came together.
It certainly goes down in my books as my happiest project. I mean, I think what was so strange was that as a project, it was the victim of awful timing, wasn't it? Because we finished, and then within a couple of months, we were thrown into the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
So we'd sort of made inroads into publicity and to looking to get it published, hadn't we? But then everything just stopped dead.
And that felt kind of, again, it felt fairly surreal, because obviously nobody knew what to expect with the whole pandemic. We didn't realize how long it was necessarily going to go on for and what the implications were going to be. And then so obviously we just weren't expecting to almost for the whole project to stall, basically, because because of things that were out of our control. And yet strangely, through all of that, the interest and the buzz for the deck never waned.
Didn't diminish, did it?
No.
Because I think what shocked me was, I mean, I knew I was working on something special, but it was when we kind of when you started to send images around to people, and we were looking, particularly when we were looking to get endorsements for the publication proposal.
Yeah.
And it was quite a shock, wasn't it? Because I didn't realize just how much you'd kind of touched on a nerve in what you'd come up with. It was almost as if there was a thirst for this kind of deck, wasn't it? And we ended up with, I mean, again, it was kind of quite funny because, I mean, that's the bit I kind of let people into a trade secret. If ever you're doing a publication proposal, the one bit I hate the most, because I don't like asking, is just saying to people, you know, can you recommend my project to this publisher that I'm approaching? You know, it kind of feels really presumptuous. But we ended up, you know, I've struggled to get 2 or 3 of those because I'm too shy with it, even though I'm kind of quite a blabbermouth. And then we kind of spent an afternoon messaging around, and we got 16 endorsements.
Yeah.
And that was when I kind of realized that, you know, we really had something that was kind of missing. You know, we'd kind of sort of plugged a gap that was long overdue to be plugged.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there, you know, subsequently between the time of us finishing it originally and obviously up until it getting published now, there has been other decks that have appeared that people have put out there, and that, you know, they all have their own merits and stuff like that. But still the mainstream had not been marketed, and I still can't believe that nobody has coined it yet. Given the fact that there's so many you know, talented and devoted Hecateans out there, I still find it quite surreal that it hasn't been done before.
Well, it was kind of a shock to me because there's been 2 decks, hasn't there? Is it 2 other decks that have been put out Hecate based?
I know. Yes, because there is one. There was the Hecate Tarot by Tineke Bobo, and I forget the other lady's name. And that was
that amazing one that came out last year. The crowdfunding.
That one's the Hecatico Tarot that was done through Kickstarter. Yeah. So and I think the lady that did that one, Marcia, she sells copies through her Etsy, and then the other tarot, the older one, is, I think that's Australian based, and I think that's like self-published as well. And there are little other like self-published symbol oracle typed, similar to my original concept with the, you know, the image cards and stuff that you know, appear online. But like you say, the mainstream publication market, you know, the big publishing, there was still a huge gaping, you know, gap in the whole thing, and especially with the popularity of things like goddess style oracles and things.
There's something that you touched on there that I think has something to do with it. Because I mean, without going into names, I mean, we hit several obstacles, didn't we? And we had sort of 2 abortive attempts with 2 different publishers.
Yes.
Which was really upsetting at the time. But one of those instances, we pulled out because we kind of realized that the publisher really kind of wasn't on the same page with us, were they? You know, in terms of, because we were on the verge of signing the deal, and then there was noises being made about, oh, well, this deck is too dark, you know, we want changes. And neither of us felt comfortable with that. But then looking back in hindsight now, I'm kind of realizing that maybe this is why the publishing world actually hasn't caught up with their audience yet with regards to what this deck is. Because I mean, in terms of, you know, audience feedback that we've had, I mean, it's been overwhelmingly positive, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But precisely for the reason that it is dark. And I think, you know, no disrespect to the 2 publishers that we dealt with but didn't strike deals with, you know, I don't think they were ready for a kind of unvarnished, quite raw dark goddess oracle, because I think there's a large percentage of the goddess stuff that is out there, I think, is at best is focusing on the light, you know, the light aspects of various goddesses. But I mean, from my opinion and my tastes, a lot of it is actually quite deliberately varnished and airbrushed in a way that I don't feel I can relate to. And one of the reasons why working on this project was so irresistible was because it was so raw. You know, you weren't actually, you were kind of giving a really honest, raw picture of this particular goddess, which is something that I don't think happens very often. within a lot of published goddess stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily for us, I mean, we eventually did strike a deal with Lo Scarabeo, who I've had a very, very successful working relationship with. But, you know, my editor at Lo Scarabeo, they kind of just got it, didn't they?
Yeah, it was just one of those things when the time came.
The time was right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I've never thought about it quite the same terms as how you have. You know, you see it from a different perspective to how I see it, because obviously we're coming from different parts and different sides in this. And I, you know, and I get what I get what you mean when you say about it being raw and you know, dealing with the darker aspects.
Yeah.
And I guess that from my, I guess that was unintentional, or unintentionally intentional, because that's my experience of the goddess. You know, my devotion with her, and you know, all of the years learning and practicing is kind of shown me that there are dark sides and there are light sides, and you can't really, you know, have one without the other. And you know,
what I really admired about what you did, though, and it's kind of made me, it's completely changed my perspective on how I see a lot of the oracles that are out there, because I think it goes even beyond the dark and light, thinking about it now, because I think what you weren't afraid to portray was, it's not just the dark and the light, but it's also the grotesque, which the further I went with, you know, with this deck, and as I learned more about Hecate from you, I realized that actually that's the kind of the ugliness, there's some ugly aspects which are actually really intrinsic to who she is, you know. One card in particular that was just one of the most fascinating ones for me to create, and that was, where are we? It's here. It was the Barbara Forber card. And that was a revelation to me, because this particular aspect of, because it translated, it's what is it, eater of filth,
something like, it's along those lines, that, you know, the eater of filth, the consumer of detritus, you know. And it's not a title or a you know, an embodiment that you would associate with sort of, you know, a divine being. And I think the thing that a lot of people sort of gloss over with Hecate is, you know, she has these lighter aspects, but in antiquity, you know, you look at the Greek magical papyri and things like that, she was, you know, there was these parts of her nature that were intrinsically intertwined with the human condition, and both you know, both in life and in death. And you know, she gets this reputation to, you know, of haunting the places where humans shouldn't be, like, you know, cemeteries and charnel grounds and the gallows and things like that. And obviously a sacred animal being a dog, back in the day, you know, back in those days, you know, wild dogs might be chewing on bits of old body that had been left out somewhere. And so the ancients saw her very, you know, very present in those very visceral and unpleasant sort of situations. And yet the reason why I actually quite like Barbara Forber as an aspect is that it's about that. Whereas a lot of the gods, especially in ancient Greece and stuff, they had a complete aversion to the miasma of the human condition. Where Hecate can actually, she can take it and she can transform it. She, you know, she can cleanse you and purify in any amount of it, and it's a very unique way of looking at a goddess who's not going to shy away from what makes you human, you know.
From my perspective, what was revelatory for me was just how much of a parallel I could draw with the Christian theology that my studies were rooted in. Because I mean, there was two aspects with this card. I mean, I'll talk about this one first. I mean, it's the fact that it's kind of not that far away from the sort of the whole concept behind the Christian atonement, in that you've got Christ who is absorbing all of the filth and darkness of the human race. And it kind of really brought home to me that, these are, I don't like using the word myth, but then if I use the word myth in the context of like a kind of a deep and, ongoing and eternal truth, these are myths that actually transcend any individual tradition. I realized that, the mythology and the folklore behind your goddess and your devotions was actually running parallel in this instinct with the tradition that I knew. And there were several instances of that while we were creating the deck. But I mean, the other thing that fascinated me with this is, that was kind of one of the more surreal days, because when I started out, I think my subconscious assumption is I didn't think I'd be creating something fluffy, but it was going to be all bright and airy and, with a few dark bits thrown in. And I'm sat there thinking, okay, so I'm creating an image here of a divine goddess who's gorging herself on entrails. She's surrounded by fire. And it was kind of one of those more surreal moments. But going back to the publishers, I think this is what several of them didn't get, because what I love about this deck it's everything about the goddess. The sort of the uncomfortable bits are not airbrushed. No. And that to me is what gives this deck its power, because it's kind of all encompassing, isn't it? I mean, I what I loved was the further we went through this, I thought, God, every aspect I could think of was getting covered, and in all, warts and all. But maybe this is kind of what made it difficult when we were pitching it. Precisely.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think I get that to look at a card like Bulba or Forba is, if you're looking at it just, at face value, which, publishers aren't reading with them as a divination tool or whatever, they're just looking at them. And if they don't have the background knowledge of what it's meant to represent, and they don't understand that actually that's quite apt and quite pertinent to the the overall theme, then they're just going to see it as that's too, it's too much, it's extreme, it's not marketable, blah blah blah. But actually, when it's taken in the context of the entire deck, and when you look through all of the different cards and the different things that we explore through it, it's yes, it's quite a dark card. It can be quite a grotesque sort of card, and yet you've also got cards that deal with much more purer aspects, light bringing aspects. So there is a huge sense of balance, I think.
Certainly, when you think, I mean, to me, that's one of the darkest cards. But then you've got the Satira card, which is just blazing light, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And profound beauty. And I think this is what I love about this. It really descends to the depths of the darkness, but goes to the pinnacles of light as well. That's what we've tried to do. But I mean, again, along similar lines. I mean, when you kind of explained the concept of the Restless Dead card to me, and I thought, I didn't expect to be doing this. I'm doing an image of a cemetery, with green zombies walking around it. I'm thinking, I like this.
Yeah, it was. There was just some really enjoyable moments in the creative process that these were all aspects that I was familiar with, and yet I'd never quite considered them in the forms that you were creating them. And I mean, I think the Restless Dead card was one that when you started, I wasn't sure where we were going with it, and I was like, but I persevered with you, and then once you started to sort of add the layers in, and we started to tweak it around, and I was like, oh yes, now I get this. I get where we're going with this, and I was like, yeah, this is good. This is what we need.
You had a very strong concept for that, but again, I don't think either of us really knew visually how it was going to translate. And there was a couple of cards like that, where I mean, your ideas were very strong. But then again, I mean, this is the kind of joy of how it worked out with us, because very often as the artist, you're working within your own limitations, and particularly as a Photoshop artist working with a collage technique, there's times when I've had to say to people, well, I can kind of do this, but I'm not sure whether I can make that look convincing. My technique is limited. I'm good at what I do, but I'm not the best. So I kind of also understand my own limitations. And that was one image where I was kind of really aware of that. And we were kind of both thinking, well, yeah, let's busk this and see how far we can push it. But it kind of became more enjoyable as it went on, didn't it? Because as you say, as the layers start to build up, and then you think, yeah, now we're getting there. And I think it's the best collaborative work is when you can see each other's skills pooling together and then the idea taking shape, which is it's kind of what we felt, really, wasn't it? Which was nice.
Yeah, and I think there was a sense of there was a bit of like a playful adventureness to it, because when we would go looking for source imagery and things that we could utilize, and because we, as much as Hecate is a goddess that's gained popularity in recent times, as far as like iconography and things, there isn't a huge amount in in high quality, royalty free Creative Commons type images. Obviously there's a lot of great stuff that's been made more recently by very talented artists and creators, but it's not, they're not things from antiquity or museums and stuff. And so there was a degree of creative license with certain images, which we did what we needed to do to make it varied, to make it unique and not sort of samey all the time. But also I think that when we did take on the more sort of creative license on things, it kind of helped communicate what we were, what that particular card was trying to do. I mean, the one that I immediately think of with this one is the first card in the deck, the primordial one. Because we utilize the quite well known image of from the Burney relief of the Queen of Night, or it's as Lilith. Some people see it as Ishtar or Inanna, because what I was trying to illustrate with that was the fact that Hecate's true origins historically we don't actually know. Her threads disappear off into the mists of time, and there isn't a pinpoint where she comes from. And yet there is something about that image of a half human, half animal style being that kind of bridges that gap. And I'm not trying to say with that card that Hecate was or is that goddess or that image, but there was something
it does give you that ambiguity, doesn't it? And it shows you the antiquity, the potential antiquity.
Yeah, and I think we also get that with the way that we put the background in which we put that in this, the sort of nebulous style cosmos with the pool of primordial creation.
I've got a particular fondness for that card because it's also, to me, it takes me back to the Quantum Tarot. And it was the inclusion of that background image was kind of, to me, was that was paying homage to the Quantum Tarot and how much I'd benefited from it and brought, as a result, and brought that experience to this deck, because it's the Pillars of Creation image that, from the Hubble Space Telescope that was actually used. Kay and I also used it on the Moon card of the Quantum Tarot. So it was lovely to use it in a completely different way. But when you suggested that image, I kind of thought, well, actually, there is no better image. It really does, to me, it sums up that complete primordial origin. And it is one of my favorite cards from the deck, both visually, but also concept wise as well. Just before we round up, pick out a couple of your other favorites. Because what we're going to be doing in the next videos is actually doing a card by card tour, isn't it?
Yeah. Favoritism is a tough one. And we will, and the one of my big bugbears with creating an oracle deck as well is I didn't want a deck that only had like 24 cards. You know, I was adamant that we were having a high number of cards, and obviously this is a 60 card deck.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And in all honesty, as I've said before, I could have carried on going. Ooh, excuse me, that's my cat's making a noise. We could have, you know, we could have potentially ended up with 150 cards. You know,
that was that was one of the nice things about this, though, wasn't it? Because it didn't. It was a godsend for me because I never felt you were struggling to actually pad. You know, you weren't padding the deck out. It was actually, you know, how do we keep this to 60? You know, which is a nice place to be. You know.
Yes, it was definitely a case of trying to, especially as we started to come towards the end of it, it was like trying to prioritize which ones I could live with and which ones I could live without.
Yes.
Which is easier said than done.
Yeah.
Oh dear, I'm having a real hard time picking.
just to actually put this into context, as we're filming this, the actual decks themselves, as will be published, have not come back from the printers. We're kind of expecting them fairly soon, aren't we? But what Ken and I do have is these. So there are have several prototype copies printed up. We've made you've made revisions, haven't you, since we did this?
Yeah, there's been some minor revisions.
Yeah. So as we sort of go through the course of these videos, I will be flashing the card images as they will appear in the published edition on screen. If you see us, we are actually rummaging with cards, but we won't always show you because the numbers are wrong on them.
Yeah.
And hopefully during the course of us filming this series, we will actually receive our courtesy copies, which will be lovely.
Hopefully.
Which we do know already. We have, at least we know what the packaging is going to look like. We know what the size and shape of the cards are. And they've done the best job, haven't they? We're kind of really thrilled. So go on, throw it at me. What have you chosen?
How many was I choosing? Just one?
Doesn't matter.
I chose three.
Go on, go for it.
So my first one is what will be the Anasa Pharmakedon card, the Queen of Witches card.
Yeah.
Now, that in itself was an interesting inclusion because that is a title and a role that the goddess plays that has a lot more of a sort of a modern following.
Yeah.
But the actual title, like a lot of the other epithets, it's not one that actually appears in antiquity as as Queen of the Witches. I mean, she's referred to having a connection with witches and witchcraft, and she's known as Queen, but not Queen of Witches in antiquity. And what I wanted is I really wanted to include this because it's for a lot of modern devotees. You know, a lot of us consider ourselves, Hekatean witches and so on. It's very important. And I and originally the card was called it was an Anasa Megissa because me and my Google Translate of of Greek, Anasa obviously it was queen, and Megissa is the modern Greek word for a witch. But in speaking with a native Greek speaker and fellow Hekatean, he basically told me that grammatically and syntaxically that doesn't quite work.
Okay.
Because it's half ancient word and half modern word.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So we kind of threw around a few suggestions, and obviously the origin of like the old sorcery in antiquity comes from pharmakeia, which is where we get things like pharmacy and that from. It was users of drugs and poisons and things like that.
Yeah.
And so he sort of pluralized pharmakeia to pharmakedon because basically these are the witches of poisons and things like that. But the thing I wanted with this card was it's a very much, especially in the modern context, is in her role as Queen of Witches, it's very much about your own sovereignty. or sovereignty. Even it's about coming into your power and things. And so that was one that I really wanted in there alongside her more established antiquity aspects. And I think as well with the card itself, I kind of knew again what I wanted, and there's a bit of a nod to Macbeth in it, and there's a lot of little subtle things that I quite liked that we just kind of dropped in, and obviously it's got quite a prominent moon image in it with the goddess.
I love doing that because I loved how we've got the sort of goddess in the moon. That was something that I really loved doing. And when we'd finished creating that image, it was one that I stood back from. I thought, oh yeah, job done. That look, that kind of that sort of does what it said on the packet.
Definitely, yeah. So
pick another one.
My other one is the Aconite card. That we deal with. I mean, it's down as death, but again, yes, it's a deadly poison, but there's rich symbolism and myth that goes along with it. I've
got to make a confession. We finished that image, and I was just struggling not to laugh because it is one of the best images in the deck. I love it.
Yeah, it just really has a some clout to it, and I mean, I want it as a T-shirt.
Well, that was what cracked me up. Because the first thing you said, "Can you email that to me? I want it on a T-shirt." Like that giant green skull,
Yeah, but it was just it was one of those things that it's not overly detailed. I mean, it is basically it's a wolf's skull with some botanical drawings of actual wolfsbane aconite sort of mirrored and layered behind it, and yet it carries a macabre beauty about it.
It is quite haunting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it was one of those images when we did it again. I kind of sat there looking at the screen and thinking, "Oh, that's quite unexpected." You kind of know. I knew what it was going to look like in theory, but by the time it was done, it was quite haunting.
Yeah, and I think the herb itself is it has a strong connection with Hecate. It was apparently referred to in some ancient sources as Hecateus. It was the herb of Hecate, and obviously some other myths say that it sprang from the saliva of Kerberos, the god. So there's lots of connections.
Who is also in the deck?
Yes, Kerberos is in there. He actually, I nearly picked him. But I was kind of trying not to pick every other card out of the deck. But yeah, so the Aconite card, Wolfsbane, was another one, and the one my last one that I decided on was the Medea card. I really love how that came together because with certain other of the cards detailing, we utilized obviously your sort of silhouette style, and we kind of still stick with that with this. But we
not
quite. We found a really, really good stock image.
Yeah.
But once we started layering things on and putting effects to it, really put across this sense of this devoted priestess of antiquity that was very, very, it's a very understated card, and yet the power and the potency is present in it. With just the incense sort of smoke and the little sort of the tripod cauldron silhouette that we've got in there, and the fact that she seems to be in this sort of eerie glowing woodland glade, doing her magics kind of thing. And again, it was one of them cards that I could see all of the elements, and then all of a sudden it just all slotted into place, and it was like, yes,
it's strange because it's one of those cards that's whenever we've handed people the test copies and they're leafing through, that's very often one of the cards that gets a lot of oohs and ahs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which it kind of surprises me, but doesn't surprise me, because it kind of just worked, but in a way that was very powerful, even though the concept was very simple. Yeah. I've got a couple. I mean, I've got a couple of my own favorites, just because these are more from the perspective of my joy at creating them. I mean, one of my favorites is the New Moon card. And it's one of the simpler images, but I can remember it's so powerful. And we didn't set out to be realistic. You know, what we've created when you look on the card is not realistic. But it just, I look at this card and I just think, yeah, slayed it. And it's got such a sense of scale and kind of austere beauty.
Yeah.
When you told me, when you
mentioned it.
Yeah. When you told me what you wanted to do, and like the sort of crescent moon, but up, on end, rather than, and I just thought, yeah, it doesn't have it. This is not about photorealism. This is actually about that kind of mythological world inside you where anything is possible. And I love that one. But I equally love. I've got two others that I equally love. One is the Voch's Magic Eye card. With the invocation, and I think more than any other card we created, that was the one that kind of gave me a sense of the sort of power of the goddess and the power of what we were trying to convey. And it kind of just ripples with powerful golden energy for me. That's what I love, and I also love that the invocation is the invocation from, it's the invocation off the card back. It's the invocation that is part of your tattoo, and we've just used it in a different way on that card, which I love.
And for people that are aware of Hecate and may or may not be members of the Covenant of Hecate, they'll recognise that particular incantation is the Ephesian letters that we use in the rite of her sacred fires, which is the annual celebration of the goddess. And so I think, again, it's another one of those things where it's something from antiquity that's been repurposed in modernity that I've kind of put back in to the oracle, because it's almost like it's a bridge between the two things. And again, that was one of those cards that probably a lot of people would probably not think of putting that in, but it was one of the ones I was really adamant that we needed to have that in.
I'm so glad you did, because to me it's just a standout, and it's kind of one of those, it's almost like the sort of emotional core of the deck for me. It kind of jumps out, but it's the fact that it is the power of words. I think that's what really comes across for me.
And
the power of invitation.
I think that's possibly where it might have been left out by other people, is because it's words. How do you convey words symbolically in an image without just literally just writing the words down? And yet the way you executed it it uses the words, but it's using them in the way that we would use them in reality. And it just really there's a vibrational element to that card.
I mean, the last one I've picked is the Kore Persephone card. And this is purely indulgent on my part, because it is visually my favorite card out the deck. But it was a funny one, because when we got to that, and you'd given the basic concept for it, but by the time we actually came to do it, you'd really fleshed it out. And we're sat at the computer and you're saying, like, I want this, 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 I want this. And I'm thinking, oh, he's having a laugh. We're not going to cram all of that into one image. And your attitude was, you could kind of see what was going on. Your attitude was like, just trust me and just let's do this. And as it unfolded, I don't think I've ever enjoyed creating an image so much as that one. And it's kind of the one card in the deck to me which is pure beauty. But one of the other things I love is that it's quite raw beauty about it at the same time. You look at that card and there's still a kind of unvarnished element to it. It's kind of raw and in touch with the elements and with nature. But it was just, your concept for it was so lovely and actually watching it unfold was kind of one of the happiest moments for me of creating, the deck. And I can remember, because I think we took a lunch break after we'd done this one, and I kind of thought, do you know, if we didn't do anything else today, I'd feel like I've achieved like the equivalent of 3 days work in a good way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the reasons I love it. But that's kind of a potted history and also a potted highlight, isn't it? Because what we plan to do in the next one is actually start our guided tour through the cards, isn't it? We're going to do 6 cards at a time and take everyone through the deck. So we hope you've enjoyed this, but also, we hope you're kind of not pulling your hair out and that you've managed to bear with us. We've been on for an hour.
Have we really? Blimey.
Yeah. 1 hour and 31 seconds as I talk. So we shall wrap this up and just say to everyone, thank you so much for watching. And, do join us for the next one. And, we hope you enjoy us giving you a tour through this deck as much as we enjoyed creating it. So thanks again to everyone, and we will see you soon. Take care.